So, hello everybody. Um, the Procedural Terrain add-on is actually released right now. It is completely finished. Man, it has been a crazy week trying to get this done because honestly, I actually tried to get it done by the end of last month, but I wasn't able to do it. But now it is completely finished. From my understanding, I'm pretty proud of it. Overall, works very well. I'm extremely happy with the performance and the overall look of the terrain. So, honestly, I kind of just want y'all to go download the add-on and just try it yourself. There's plenty of new features in the new menu. Like, there's a ton of new features in the menu that weren't there before. So, I highly suggest checking out the mod. If you don't actually play Gmod and just kind of watch my videos for entertainment, then I guess I can explain everything that's going on. And I'm actually probably just going to explain just lag in particular. So it's definitely been interesting trying to optimize this as best as possible. But I'll go over that in a second. First thing, of course, earlier you were required to have Half-Life 2 Episode 2 installed. That is no longer the case. Congratulations to people that can't afford the game, I guess. There is no need to download that anymore. The tree models and the water model come with the add-on, and you shouldn't have to download anything extra. Swimming, of course, works exactly the same. I'm pretty proud of it. It looks pretty nice. A cool little effect that I made is when you go, you can swim, and if you go out into here, there's actually no water. Doing this seems extremely complicated, but it actually isn't, because the water here is actually a singular quad. It's not actually like a whole bunch of meshed vertices. It's actually a single quad, and I'll explain how this works in a second. So first thing, I will explain lag. So lag is quite interesting as source. Lag is definitely a big thing that you have to overcome with this add-on. And the biggest thing that comes from lag, or the biggest thing that causes lag in maps, is the hefty, large amount of entities or baked objects inside of the map. So for instance, if you were to go on a map such as GM Fork or GM Boreas, a whole bunch of other kind of foresty maps, you would probably notice the frame rate is somewhat low. And then when you try my terrain, the frame rate is actually about as good as GM Flatgrass. There's not really much of a difference in frame rate, even though you're rendering all of these trees. The main difference between these trees and the trees in other baked maps is the trees in the other baked maps are rendered individually. The trees in the terrain here are baked into chunks. So for instance, these trees here on the edge are not being rendered. I can't highlight the chunks anymore because I actually detoured I actually made it so this is part of the world. You can't edit it at all. There's no fizz gunning. You can't do anything to it. So unfortunately, I can't highlight the chunks anymore and show you exactly where the boundaries are. But let's say there was a boundary right here. This tree, if I look this way, it would no longer be rendered, along with literally every tree on this chunk here. However, in a normal map, it would scan each individual tree, making sure that it wouldn't be in your view. These trees here are not processed individually, they are processed as a whole, meaning that it is easier on the computational power because it's divided into chunks instead of being done individually per tree. The nice thing as well as doing with chunks is you don't really have to worry about too much performance loss. If I don't look at a chunk, it isn't rendered at all. Very useful for performance and all that kind of stuff. So the trees are actually being rendered differently than a normal tree. So you may notice that the trees have collision. I can hit this tree and it just, it collides as you'd expect the tree to do. But what this tree is, it's actually not it's not even individual. These trees aren't individual. These trees are actually part of the chunk. There's literally impossible to move this tree around, and even if I tried, it wouldn't work. And no matter how hard I try, no matter how hard I move this tree, even if I removed all of the like functions that make the world like if I enabled fizz gunning and all that stuff, you still wouldn't be able to move the trees, and that is because it is part of the chunk. The collision with the tree is done exactly the same as the chunk. And since the collision with the trees are the same as the chunk, it's actually less processing if you weren't actually in that chunk. So for instance, that chunk over there would not be, its collision data would not be processed because I'm not in the chunk. I'm not near the chunk over there. However, these trees would be processed because I am in the chunk. If I move around, my frame rate actually would dip a little bit due to all of the collision processing that it's doing. However, you probably don't notice it because I'm capping my frame rate to 128. So by allowing these trees to be in separate chunks and having the collisions in separate chunks, again, instead of iterating over every single tree and checking that if I'm near the tree, it's just doing a whole chunk calculation and seeing if I'm inside of the chunk. And if I am inside the chunk, do collision with the trees. Pretty simple stuff. So yeah, I'm very happy about the performance with this add-on. If I do FPS max 1000, and then you can see my frame rate is about 300 roughly. The normal frame rate that I get on Flatgrass is roughly 5 to 600, and with this terrain it's only about halved it. So that's not actually terrible when comparing it to other Gmod maps. So the water is actually quite interesting. So if I go under here, the water isn't under here. That's interesting. That's weird. If I go outside, the water is out here. That's kind of weird. And as a non-game designer, you probably understand that. Oh, of course it would do that. Why wouldn't it do that? It's water. But if you were a game designer slash programmer, you would know, what the heck? How is he doing that? So the water is actually being calculated as an entire plane. If I were to use a wireframe material, and if you don't know what the wireframe material does, basically it highlights all of the triangles on a model so that they are visible. For instance, if I were to, oops, my bad. There we go. You can see it highlights all of the triangles on this model. It may be a little difficult to see. Let me overlay it with this. It's probably a little easier. There we go. So as you can see, it highlights all of the triangles of the model. I can use this on any model, for instance this burger here, and you can see all of the triangles that are being processed on the burger. I will do the same thing for the terrain, so let me go into the menu, replace this here, or actually go into the water material and replace it with a wireframe. There we go. Okay, actually I had the mountains set to a slime bubble. Oh yes, I did. Hold up, let me set that back to the default material real fast. There we go. Alright, awesome. So now you can see the entire water plane. It may be a little difficult to see, but there are edges over there, and you can see that it's entirely one plane of water. There is the two triangles, one big triangle there, one big triangle there, and that's how the water is rendered. However, when I go over under here, that triangle should be under here. That's weird. Why isn't it rendering? Well, I'm taking advantage of the fact that this is actually a height map. By allowing this to be a height map, I'm technically allowed to go under here, and I can do a check with if there's any terrain under me, and if there isn't any terrain under me, then I stop any water calculations from being done. That way players can build under the space here without any issues or conflicting with any water. And if you do the check and you do see terrain under the player, then you enable the water calculations to be done. As you can see, the overlay texture is the wireframe texture because it is not the water texture. So let me set the water texture back to normal, just like so. Give it a moment to generate. It takes a little while. So yes, now you can see that the water texture is back to normal, and if I go under here, it is invisible. If I halfway clip into the terrain, the check to see whether I am inside of the terrain is actually negated because I am technically outside of the terrain. However, I can see inside, and as you can see, there is actually water inside of there being rendered. However, as soon as I go inside of this terrain, you can see the water disappears, giving the illusion that there actually isn't any water in here. I assume this this kind of technique is probably used in video games a lot, but I think it's kind of cool that I kind of made up the technique myself. That didn't come from any other resources or anything. I just kind of made that up on the fly, and honestly, I'm pretty proud of it. It looks pretty nice. So you can have this whole area under here to build, even though there is a plane of water over here. Hopefully I explained that pretty well. If you didn't understand it, my bad. I tried to explain it best I could. But basically, having water that is like complex and like shifts like this is extremely difficult to do in video games, because you just need to have like a weird outline kind of thing, and it's not that intuitive, and it kind of looks bad, and I don't know, it's just not that good. So with this illusion, it basically allows me to have the space under the terrain where people, I guess, can build or whatever, do whatever they want if they don't want to be on the terrain on the surface. So yes, that is about it for now. Again, there are plenty of other features that I've added in the menu that I haven't gone over. One of them being all of these custom terrain functions you can play around with. You can even make your own if you're like kind of a programmer and you know what you're doing. You can make your own custom height functions here and play around with that if you want. Multiplayer compatible, of course. I have tested this myself. Players can join the live or join your game, and they will see what you see. So pretty nice that that exists. You can change the material of the rock or the grass, as you probably saw earlier. So let me just find a material. Let's use this wood kind of material here. So let me copy the path, go into there, and you will see that this grass material here will change to that wood material. There we go. You can see that it kind of changes, and when I regenerate the terrain, there we go. You can see the wood texture is being overlaid with the rock texture, and it looks pretty interesting, I'm not gonna lie. So yes, this allows for a lot more customizability, including with lighting and all that stuff being generated perfectly fine. Many users probably haven't noticed this, but shadows do exist. Shadows are not something that just came with the terrain. I had to add those manually. It was a very painful process, but eventually we got there in the end. Yes, so that is about it for now. Please check out the add-on. I highly suggest it. I made it, I guess. So of course I'm going to tell you to use it, but you know, again, I hope you have fun with the add-on if you do decide to try it, and I will see you guys in another video.